They claim to own speech itself throughout the world. Right? So, like two preposterous things. First, you claim to own speech, not the speech of yourself, but the speech of others. And not just those within your vicinity, but those on the other side of the planet. Like how ludicrous that is. It's baffling. And the exact same argument now, 20 years later, can be made with Bitcoin. Right? Bitcoin is just speech.
Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am thrilled to have you here joining me on my mission to help shine light on the corruption of money. Now, if this is your first time listening to the What is Money Show, I strongly recommend that you go back to episodes 1 through 9 first, which lays a lot of the groundwork for many of the concepts that we explore on the show. These first 9 episodes are my series with Michael Saylor, and thousands of people have told me that this is the best podcast series they've ever heard, hands down, and that it was instrumental to their understanding of money and Bitcoin. So if you're looking to start a deep dive into the nature of money, I don't think there's any place better that you can start other than episode 1 of this show. Now, a little bit about this show and how it makes money. The What is Money Show is 100% sponsor based. So all of our revenues are derived from direct sponsorships. And I strive to be very selective about the sponsors that I work with, specifically only using sponsors that I use personally, and also choosing sponsors that have values which are well aligned to the values expressed on this show, such as freedom, education, self-sovereignty, etc. So what I'm going to do now is a few ad reads right at the top of the show, and then I'll do a few more ad reads in the middle. And I hope you'll take the time to listen to them, as again, these are hand-selected sponsors, and I think you'll like what they have to offer. Today's podcast is brought to you by In Wolf's Clothing. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times per year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that help fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. So go to wolfnyc.com to learn more about the program or apply. Again, that's WolfNYC, WOLFNYC.com. Max Hillebrand, welcome back to the What is Money Show.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, again for the invite, and hello and welcome to the listeners. I'm really excited to be back. I've been loving the Crypto Anarchy series so far, and we have another amazing piece for this round.
Yes, I think this is our 3rd installment of the Crypto Anarchy series. You and I have done a series previously on The Ethics of Liberty by Rothbard. But in this series, we've been going through some excellent written pieces that are sort of foundational to the cypherpunk ethos. And this time we're going to be going through the piece written by John Perry Barlow titled A Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace. And so just like last time, we're going to start by reading through this piece in its entirety. It's not that long, just 3 pages or so. And then we will go through each paragraph of the written piece and sort of dissect it and discuss it. And so with that, we're going to have you, Sir Max, do the honors of reading through this thing.
A Declaration of the Independence of Cyberspace by John Perry Barlow. Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel, I come from cyberspace, the new home of mind. On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. We have no elected government, nor are we likely to have one. So I address you with no greater authority than that which liberty itself always speaks. I declare the global social space we are building to be naturally independent of the tyrannies you seek to impose on us. You have no moral right to rule us, nor do you possess any method of enforcement we have true reason to fear. Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. You have neither solicited nor received ours. We did not invite you. You do not know us, nor do you know our world. Cyberspace does not lie within your borders. Do not think that you can build it as though it were a public construction project. You cannot. It is an act of nature, and it grows itself through our collective actions. You have not engaged in our great and gathering conversation, nor did you create the wealth of our marketplaces. You do not know our culture, our ethics, or our unwritten codes that already provide our society more order than could be obtained by any of your impositions. You claim there are problems among us that you need to solve. You use this claim as an excuse to invade our precincts. Many of these problems do not exist. Where there are real conflicts, where there are wrongs, we will identify them and address them by our means. We are forming our own social contract. This governance will arise according to the conditions of our world, not yours. Our world is different. Cyberspace consists of transactions, relationships, and thought itself, arrayed like a standing wave in the web of our communications. Ours is a world that is bound, that is both everywhere and nowhere, but it is not where bodies live. We are creating a world that all may enter without privilege or prejudice according to race, economic power, military force, or station or birth. We are creating a world where anyone, anywhere, may express his or her beliefs, no matter how singular, without fear of being coerced into silence or conformity. Your legal concepts of property, expression, identity, movement, and context do not apply to us. They are all based on matter, and there is no matter here. Our identities have no bodies, so unlike you, we cannot obtain order by physical coercion. We believe that from ethics, enlightened self-interest, and the common weal, our governance will emerge. Our identities may be distributed across many of your jurisdictions. The only law that all of our constituent cultures would generally recognize is the Golden Rule. We hope we will be able to build our particular solutions on that basis, but we cannot accept the solutions you are attempting to impose. In the United States, you have today created a law, the Telecommunications Reform Act, which repudiates your own constitution and insults the dreams of Jefferson, Washington, Mill, Madison, de Tocqueville, and Brandeis. These dreams must now be born anew in us. You are terrified of your own children, since they are natives in a world where you will always be immigrants. Because you fear them, you entrust your bureaucracies with the parental responsibilities you are too cowardly to confront yourself. In our world, all the sentiments and expressions of humanity, from the debasing of the angelic, are parts of a seamless whole, the global conversation of bits. We cannot separate the air that chokes from the air upon which wings beat. In China, Germany, France, Russia, Singapore, Italy, and the United States, you are trying to ward off the virus of liberty by erecting guard posts at the frontiers of cyberspace. These may keep out the contagion for a small time, but they will not work in a world that will soon be blanketed by bits-bearing media. Your increasingly obsolete information industries would perpetuate themselves by proposing laws, in America and elsewhere, that claim to own speech itself throughout the world. These laws would declare ideas to be another industrial product, no more noble than pig iron. In our world, whatever the human mind may create can be reproduced and distributed infinitely at no cost. The global conveyance of thought no longer requires your factories to accomplish. These increasingly hostile and colonial measures place us in the same position as those previous lovers of freedom and self-determination who had to reject the authorities of distant, uninformed powers. We must declare our virtual selves immune to your sovereignty, even as we continue to consent to your rule over our bodies. We will spread ourselves across the planet so that no one can arrest our thoughts. We will create a civilization of the mind in cyberspace. May it be more humane and fair than the world your governments have made before. written in Davos, Switzerland, February 8th, 1996.
Wow. Very powerful. Um, the fact that it was written in 1996 too. So this is really 25 years before the commercial
Yeah.
internet really took off.
This is before Google. This is before eBay, right?
Yeah.
It's before PayPal. It's crazy.
Do you know much about the
Extremely
author?
prescient.
Like what was his how did he was he just is he I guess is he a cypherpunk and was he just at the cutting edge of digital technology or what's his deal?
Yeah, exactly. John Barry Barlow was a writer, a
Mm.
thinker, and a poet, basically.
Hmm.
He wrote lyrical, like the lyrics to a lot of Grateful Dead songs,
Oh, cool.
and then later established the Electronic Frontier Foundation, EFF.org, right?
Ah,
A extremely important think tank, or yeah, just collaboration of people who, well, declare the independence of cyberspace, right? And were
wow.
very influential in the body of thought at that time, as
Mm.
well then in regulation, right? And fight against overreaching regulation.
Mm.
So he was pretty influential.
Yeah, it's really really well written and quite the indictment of the existing political order. Um, and yeah, I like how he's painting the internet and cyberspace in general as kind of like a new frontier, right? This
Mm.
it reminded me of the Sovereign Individual where they talk about digital space or cyberspace being something like the high seas, like a territory that's ungovernable effectively. And so, still today we have international waters and whatnot. So this idea that we have a new forum for transactions, expressions, communications that cannot that a territory that cannot be governed effectively. Um, it's almost like an anarcho-capitalist dream, right? This is kind of an ideal towards which the libertarian philosophy has always been striving.
Yeah, exactly. And this builds on a way of thinking back then called the internet exceptionalism, where it basically says that, hey, this internet thing, it's extremely special and it's something that we have not seen like this before.
Mm,
And therefore we need to be very careful with how we think about this and what actions we take within and outside of the internet, and also what rules shall be imposed on this internet and
mm,
the people who act there within. And like it was written in Davos at the World Economic Forum,
mm,
just after I think George Bush enacted that Telecommunications Reform Act, which is later mentioned in the piece, which basically established a thought police. People who can say what is not decent to publish.
mm,
So which words are illegal to speak and to reproduce and to tell others. So this was even before the crypto wars, right, with
mm,
PGP and such. But it was definitely where this fight between a free people who may speak and a body of slaves who will be told what to say, uh, certainly started, and therefore it is so influential, because it really embodied that spirit of independence that the early pioneers of this technology
mm,
felt. And
mm,
I think it's very very present to later what comes with Bitcoin, and that's
mm.
why I think that writings as such are extremely important for us Bitcoiners to internalize and to realize that the struggle that we are fighting right now is nothing new. It has been going on for a long time, especially in with this technology of the internet. Um,
Yeah, it's fantastic. We almost take it for granted today, right? The internet has become just like another utility that we depend on, like electricity or water or anything else. But that taking it for granted might cause us to forget how significant of an innovation this really is, right? We have,
mhm.
for the first time ever, I guess. I mean, I think
ever that we have this forum for limitless free speech. I mean, I guess you could say the forum for free speech before was just physical space, but that doesn't travel very far. Um, and obviously you can write things, you could distribute information via radio or television, but those were very few distribution channels that were then few throats to choke, so to speak. So they could be coerced and controlled somewhat easily. But when you get into the age of the internet, you have this permissionless peer-to-peer media distribution model. You go from a handful of information distribution channels to every individual in the world is capable of being a broadcaster. And all of a sudden, the enforcement cost of trying to control all of that speech just becomes astronomical effectively. So you get a forum for basically limitless free speech. And then with Bitcoin on top of the internet, as basically being the latest layer of the internet, you get borderless and stateless money. And that's just a total game changer as well. So I guess, yeah, it's interesting. It's just hard to overstate how significant of a combination of innovations these are, the internet plus Bitcoin. And we're still living through this experiment, right? We don't know where this thing goes, but it's quite a tumultuous transitional time to be alive, to say the least.
Yeah, for sure. Right. And like there is a huge transition, and that's alluded to in the very first sentence, right? Governments of the industrial world, you weary giants of flesh and steel. Like, I mean, first of all, that's beautiful prose, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it shows like these are old weary giants like that
Mm-hmm.
that have clearly accomplished a lot. I mean, look at the Industrial Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
The progress up to 1996 was already absolutely staggering, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
truly incredible on what humankind has achieved in meat space up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
But now we have the specter haunting the world, right? The specter coming from cyberspace, the new home of mind, where the home of mind, right? It's something that we like, I guess, didn't even think about that much in the past of like what are ideas and what are these things that are not in meat space, that are not physical, not in flesh and steel, but concepts and processes and techniques and history and words, right? And why are they so special, so unique? And I guess the internet, especially at that time, was the first glimpse of how extremely powerful the realm of numbers is and the
Mm-hmm.
realm of the mind. This is highlighted here of a big change coming. Something that has always been there. People have always thought for themselves and always spoken with each other and shared information. But as later will be alluded to, like to do that at almost no cost and being able to reproduce information ad infinitum to billions of people, that is a fundamental shift in what it means to be human. Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's we've always wanted to exchange ideas freely, but there's always been I don't know, what do we call this? Like the tyrannical impulse or the authoritarian impulse to try to control the flow of information or at least curb the flow of information to only allow narratives that support your rule, right? So anyone that speaks out against the dictator, you want to sort of squash that to maintain uh, the dictatorial powers. But when you start to inhibit free speech, you interrupt this truth discovery process. Maybe it was Orwell said something like, "If nothing else, liberty means the ability to tell people what they don't want to hear." Right. So this idea that the truth hurts, and sometimes it needs to be said, even if there's certain people that don't want it said, is very important to the ongoing adaptation of human civilization. Right. That information needs to flow, otherwise if it stagnates, then we get this buildup of misfitness that eventually culminates in some type of calamity. And the other thing that really stands out to me here, I read, well, I didn't read, I listened to Atlas Shrugged recently, finally, 64 hour audiobook.
Yeah,
But I could not recommend it more highly. It is just so comprehensive, all encompassing, beautifully written. The audiobook's fantastic. The voice acting is great. And one of the points Rand makes in that book is the supremacy of the mind, how it really is the ultimate source of all human wealth. Um, she has a quote. I think this is from, we published this on the channel, Francisco d'Anconia's Money Speech. I think this is from the Money Speech, but she has an excerpt from Atlas Shrugged where she writes, quote, try to obtain your food by means of nothing but physical motions, and you'll learn that man's mind is the root of all the goods produced and of all the wealth that has ever existed on earth, unquote. So when we, and it's, you know, the marketplace is the interconnection of human minds. This is what John Vervaeke would call distributed cognition, right? We solve our biggest and most challenging problems through distributed cognition. If you have an interruption in the connections between minds in the marketplace, then you are inhibiting the collective human capacity to solve problems, to innovate, to produce wealth, etc. And I think that's been kind of the trap we've been in, right? That there are people in political power that want to remain in political power, but to do so, they need to keep a tight lid on the flow of information. But that tight lid is inhibiting the market process from, again, creating wealth, solving problems. And that's been sort of our rock and hard place, right? We have information that, what does Jeff Booth say? Information wants to be free. It's been struggling to get out and flow freely. But then you have individuals inside of political hierarchies that are trying to keep it isolated or controlled. And so we've had this struggle, and then all of a sudden, boom, cyberspace. This giant territory where it's very difficult to erect borders and constraints. And yeah, as he writes here, right? On behalf of the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. You are not welcome among us. You have no sovereignty where we gather. So it's a free territory for the human mind for human minds to interact with one another and to manifest all of the things that interconnected human minds can manifest.
Yeah, exactly. And it's about, well, being left alone, right? Specifically from tyrants.
Mm-hmm.
Because under tyranny, the mind cannot flourish. And
Mm-hmm.
we cannot innovate and build if we are coerced. It is a contradiction in fact, because as Ayn Rand so beautifully put it, a free mind is required for any form of production and
Yes.
for any form of consumption either. So in order to produce something beautiful, we need to not just allow, but we need to recognize the inherent inalienable rights of individuals to think for themselves. That is a right. That is a good thing. It is not a wrong or a bad thing. It is something that will inherit, not just improve and bring prosperity to the individual, but in the long run to everyone. Because out of free individuals emerges a free market with free trade and free production in order to solve extremely complex and humongously huge problems, like establishing cyberspace in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We could have never achieved this incredibly resilient system without an incredible amount of hours of dedicated work from people to, come up with computer science and the first computational hardware, and then the software that we build on top of this, and the encryption algorithms that we use to sustain and create these spaces. Without all of this mind work, we would not have cyberspace in the first place.
Yes. Yeah, it's, what are we saying here? It's like the cyberspace is unleashing the cognitive division of labor in a way, right?
Yeah.
Like you're just, what do we say? Many hands make light work. Two heads are better than one. Like all these old adages of, obviously humans are designed to cooperate. We're economically better off when we cooperate. but we've had limitations on that prior to cyberspace, and now again, you have unlimited permissionless communication. You have the total free flow of ideas, and when the liquidity of ideas goes up, you get into the situation where we're just solving problems better, faster, cheaper, right? You're accelerating or enhancing the market process, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think your point is great too. We've said this before in this series. I think that the root word of sovereignty is no, right? Just the
Mm-hmm.
ability to say no and take your business elsewhere is what keeps producers honest. And that is not a relationship dynamic we have had with the state historically. Like you just can't, like, sure, you can get up and move to another jurisdiction, but you're just moving from one predatory regime into another. There hasn't really been a viable way to say no to statism uh, in total, right? You've always just had to choose the lesser of several evils, basically, and that's a problem because also, as you said, coercion cannot induce growth, right? This whole thing, coercion and theft, these things are decremental to human productivity. Again, very intuitively, right? Every hour that's spent coercing or stealing from someone is an hour that's spent not producing. So, to the extent that we do any of these acts, we're reducing not only productivity itself, but we're also reducing the incentives for producers to produce because they can't keep as much of the products of their effort as they otherwise could. And this is again is obvious, right? Like, of course, coercion doesn't work, doesn't induce growth. Go outside and try to yell at your garden to grow faster, right? It doesn't work. You have to let natural processes take hold. Um, the same is true in an economic system.
If you are a business owner or manager, you should know these three numbers: 36,000, 25, and 1. 36,000 is the number of businesses that have upgraded to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system, which allows you to streamline accounting, financial management, human resources, and more. NetSuite turns 25 years old this year. That's 25 years of helping businesses do more with less, close their books in days rather than weeks, and to drive down cost. And finally, 1, because your business is one of a kind. So with NetSuite, you get a customized solution for all your key performance indicators in one efficient system with one source of truth. NetSuite is everything you need all in one place. Right now, you can download NetSuite's popular KPI checklist designed to give you consistently excellent performance absolutely free at netsuite.com/whatismoney. That's netsuite.com/whatismoney to get your free KPI checklist. Again, netsuite.com/whatismoney. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, iCoin Technologies. iCoin has released a free software update for all existing wallet holders that includes a secure messaging feature called Chamber. With the Chamber upgrade, you can send text messages with all the security benefits of a cold device. With wallet-to-wallet encrypted messaging, there is zero chance of a message being decrypted by a snooping third party. Chamber's encrypted messages can only be created and read on an iCoin wallet, which means messages are never seen in plain text on a hot device. You can use any messaging platform to send Chamber encrypted messages. Even if the messaging channel is compromised, your messages will remain uncrackable. You can now generate and store your message encryption keys on a cold device. This means you become the central authority and your encryption keys are never seen on a network-connected device or kept in cloud storage by a third party. So why not protect your private communications like you protect your Bitcoin private keys? Pick up a few iCoin Chambers today for friends, family, and coworkers. With the iCoin Chamber, your privacy is built right in. Go to iCoinTechnology.com today and use promo code Bitcoin23 for 30% off of this new sleek hardware wallet.
He writes, I guess we're going to the second paragraph here. He writes, "We have no elected government, nor are we likely to have one. So I address you with no greater authority than that with which liberty itself always speaks. I declare the global social space we are building to be naturally independent of the tyrannies you seek to impose on us." That word authority, I've always thought is very interesting because it's closely related to the word author. And, as Peterson and many others now say we all inhabit stories. And so cyberspace plus Bitcoin is really just, I guess, leading us into a world where individuals can author their own stories rather than just being written into the stories of those that can project the most physical force. Um, and of course, of course, it's not a perfect solution, but it definitely is giving people. This is a shift of power from centralized structures to the people. And I think that word authority is just very telling, in that it's the reduction of centralized authority, but the increase of self-authorship. I wonder what thoughts you might have on that particular passage.
Yeah, like we have no elected government, right? If government is the state, and the state being defined as a monopoly on violence, why do we not need a government then? Because in cyberspace there is no violence, right? We
Mm,
cannot expel force in this digital realm because there is no matter to exert force on.
mm,
So we simply there is no theft in cyberspace. You may
mm,
speak bad words, right? But
mm,
sticks and bones will break my bones, but
mm,
words will never harm me.
mm,
So this means that again, it's the fundamental difference of the scarce world and the non-scarce world, which we had the great
mm,
series on with Stefan Kinsella,
mhm,
um, and also in our series right here we spoke about this, that the aspect that some goods are exclusive and can only be used by one person at one time for one specific reason means that there is a potential conflict over who can allocate these resources,
mm,
and that potential conflict has to be solved by a certain set of rules.
mm,
Well, it can be either communism or private property society, basically, or some shades thereof in between. However, in a non-scarce cyberspace, where any information that you would like to read from any person who has ever said it, you can acquire this information for basically free. Right?
mm,
And then not just that, but you can also talk to whomever you want, who also wants to talk with you, regardless of where they are. And potentially even with the dead in terms of
mm,
new large language models that can embody a certain a realm of ideas and rehash it given new context. This is something that is almost time travel to some extent, and this is all possible in a realm where scarcity does not apply.
mm,
And this is why we're not likely to need a body of elected governments to compel force and the monopoly thereof, because
mm,
in this realm there is no force. This is inviolable property.
mm. Yeah, it's well, it's yeah, it's wild. I guess for the longest, if you ever, I remember watching Star Trek as a kid, and the introduction to the show shows them going into space and saying, "Space, the final frontier." And so I grew up kind of thinking that was the next frontier for humanity, and maybe it is, but we missed this one, right? This whole cyberspace is a new frontier, um, specifically for ideas, communications, expression, transactions, as we've said, and that the problems that it solves and the capabilities that it unlocks are in some ways more significant than discovering a new physical frontier, right? If we just went to space, we might still have coercive political hierarchies running the show. But with something like cyberspace, you just get a brand new cooperative dynamic among people. And that's really interesting. Um, and this whole idea, coercion just doesn't work there, which is also unique, right? Because coercion works in basically every physical space. But when you go into digital space, as we say in Bitcoin, you can't point a gun at a math problem. It just doesn't work, right? So um, you move from this world where the state owns part of you and part of your time, right? Through the credible threat of physical coercion, into a world where, so that's from statism to something like sovereign individualism, where each person basically owns themselves purely and wholly, right? They can decide what to do with their time. Uh, Whatever wealth they create with their time, they can fully control. So we get a great uh, degree of autonomy that that just is not possible, I guess, in any physical space. And so at the end of that passage, he writes, "You have no moral right to rule us, nor do you possess any methods of enforcement we have true reason to fear." It's like we just said, right? Your weapons and physical coercion don't work in the digital domain. And he goes on to write, "Governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. You have neither solicited nor received ours. We did not invite you. You do not know us, nor do you know our world. Cyberspace does not lie within your borders. Do not think that you can build it as though it were a public construction project. You cannot. It is an act of nature and it grows itself through our collective actions." Ooh. Um, how, okay, so the last line, how should we think of cyberspace as an act of nature? And then to what extent should we be concerned about government attempts to turn the internet into a centrally planned public utility? Like I've seen politicians recently saying things like, "Oh, we need to KYC the internet, right? You need to have a driver's license or something to even access, to even go online, so they can trace, track, and control all of your internet or social media activity." How do we reconcile these things? What cyberspace is an act of nature versus the zoo that governments are attempting to make out of it today?
Yeah, I think that cyberspace is inherently a free market, and there's the invisible hand of the free market, which I guess is what is being alluded to here. That without any central point of control or dictation of the direction that this realm goes to, it still progresses, and it progresses astonishingly. I mean, think back to 1996 when this was written, and compare the tech stack from back then to the tech stack of now, which embodies cyberspace. It is breathtaking the amount of advancement that was achieved in this extremely short time by simply leaving people alone and not having monopolies to restrict who can innovate and who can provide which services. The end result of that is again that 8 billion people have access to the knowledge of hundreds of billions of people from the past, and can be acquired at barely no cost. And with that, and no ability to prevent people from speaking up, from speaking to each other, and from providing useful services and for solving problems for other people, with no restriction to new market participants entering this. Well, that is the collective actions, right? It's individuals acting in all over the place to then emerge something that resembles a greater and greater problem-solving ability. And that then coupled with this idea of free software, that we can solve a problem once and then ship it to everyone for free, is exactly that. It enables us to become more and more proficient and more productive, without having to sacrifice this technology to someone else, right? You don't give up the software once you publish it. No, you retain a perfect quality of the copy of the source code. In fact, when you publish it to 8 billion other people, the likelihood that someone of those minds will find a superior solution to the problem, and then also tell it to you so that you benefit from the improvement to the software stack, that is in fact how software works. Like, no developer writes his own code anymore. Everyone uses libraries and abstractions that were created from other people and reviewed by other people and adapted and improved.
That's such a good point. This whole idea of the diffusion of knowledge being so rapid, right? Like what you just said, solve a problem once anywhere, and then you distribute the schematic for the solution, right? Whatever that is, the product or the service. And then you've solved it for everyone, everywhere, forever, right?
Yeah.
Like the idea, it's just it's a wildfire, basically. And the further to that point, the diffusion of knowledge that is incredibly rapid also serves as a scaffolding for the further development of knowledge, right? People don't need to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, every time. You just grab, whatever's out there and drop it into some modular software development schematic, and then you don't, like, what's a good example? Payments, I guess, right? Where people are just um, drag and drop these different payment solutions, whether it's Stripe, like a fiat rail solution, or you've got what is the Bitcoin based one, BTC Pay Server, things like that. Right, you can just grab these things and add them to your website or your online shop, and you don't need to build the payment processor. It's already been built. You just grab it and drop it on there. Plug and play, maybe something like that. I hope I'm not overstating how simple that is, but I'm not a technical guy. But it seems like
It's easy, right?
something like that.
2 weeks and it's done.
But since 1996, when this was written, right? So we're sitting in 2023. So that's what, 27 years. FANG stocks, Facebook, Apple, Netflix, I forgot the other end, Google, smartphones,
Yeah.
Uber, and ride sharing in general, Airbnb and house sharing in general, Bitcoin, obviously huge. And most recently, AI/large language models. I mean, that's just 27 years.
Yeah. Damn, right?
So in 27 years, like, we've changed, advertising fundamentally, distribution of goods, distribution of media. We've created search engines. We've put a supercomputer in everyone's pocket. We've created ride sharing. We've created home sharing, which is increasing the utilization rates of assets, right? Instead of the car sitting idle all the time or the house sitting idle, it's getting used and monetized. We've created a disruptor to gold and or central banking, which is Bitcoin. And now we have, I guess, an extension of search engines, which are large language models, right? They're like souped up search engines, I guess, or more personalized. That's just 27 years of innovation in cyberspace. What do the next 27 years look like?
Yeah. Building upon everything that came before.
Yes.
Right? Like Uber wasn't possible before the iPhone. There's a stepping function and a certain order of innovations that
Right.
has to happen in order for the next one, path dependency.
Yes.
That is quite essential. And now that we have established all of this that you just said, and we're at this point in the path, what we can build next is like, woof, like
Yes.
crazy,
Yes.
absolutely crazy.
Yeah, I'm
And
reminded.
even the people who've worked on each of these fundamental building blocks have no idea, absolutely no idea what crazy minds out there in cyberspace will come up with to build next.
Exactly. I'm reminded of that chart that shows the diffusion rate of new innovations, like how long it takes to go from 0% adoption to, whatever the adoption, basically the adoption curves for new technologies. But they kept getting faster, right? Because as you're saying, the infrastructure was laid prior. So for what was the one? I think it was, like the telephone had a certain curve, had a certain steepness to its adoption rate, but the internet was much faster because the telephone infrastructure was already physically laid. So all you had to do is sort of piggyback the internet infrastructure on top of it. Obviously, there were some modifications, but then things come along like, the FANG stocks we mentioned, and the adoption rates are super fast because they're just software deployments, right? It's not even there. Obviously, there's hardware on the back end, but the software can be deployed to consumers super quickly. So presumably, things like Bitcoin the adoption rate of Bitcoin should be even faster than the internet, right? Because the internet infrastructure is already in place. I assume the same would be true for AI and or large language models. So you get this accelerant effect, right? That each new innovation benefits from the efficiencies of the innovations antecedent to it.
Yeah, exactly. And this is why this space is naturally independent of the tyrannies. Like it is simply out of this realm, right? It is no longer applicable, and that fact alone, has to be celebrated.
Yes.
That we can really take this to the next level. And from the first sentence, or second, I from the future, I ask you of the past to leave us alone. Because the future is fundamentally different from the past, and yes, there are amazing technologies developed in the past on whom we can rely upon to build the next great iteration. But equally so, there are certain negative aspects of the past, like slavery and tyranny, that absolutely have to be abolished for the future to become as bright and as prosperous as it could possibly be. And this effort of cyberspace is a phenomenally beautiful way of addressing this problem, of not trying to convince the slave owner to please stop it, but to simply build tools where he is obsolete.
Mm. Is that the key to pushing back against governments attempting to domesticate the internet, to just build tools that they can't interfere with?
Exactly, right? To be naturally independent, in the sense, like, it doesn't matter how big your guns are, strong encryption works, and there's nothing that you can do about it. So that's basically the cypherpunk ethos, right? Build technologies that are unstoppable, so that you can truly declare your independence in cyberspace. Because if without strong protections that actually increase the cost of attack, right? Then a simple declaration is empty words. It needs to be followed up with being actually defended in the nature of things. But thankfully, math and cryptography is a beautiful thing in nature that we have discovered and that we can use. And of course, not just that, but any bits and bytes, any computer software stack. These are phenomenally tools that work in reality and that are right to work because they are correct, because they are inherent with how things are. And again, with this new home of mind, we can review these technologies and these software stacks. Like, cryptography used to be the most arcane magic by a few select individuals and militaries not so long ago, right? But nowadays, cryptography is used by everyone, right? We have dispersed these technologies from the hand of a few to the hand of everyone, and that is a fundamental shift in the power dynamics.
No, it's such a great point, and I really think this is key to what makes us human. Actually, we all typically, when people are inquiring into what distinguishes humans from animals, they'll point to something like language. Say, oh, well, humans, speak and humans think, we use cognitive software we call language. But I think it's actually more general than that, that we are, because language is a tool. What really distinguishes us from animals is that we are highly sophisticated tool using creatures. And so the better tools we have at our disposal, the more human really we become, more human and humane. Interesting thing about cyberspace is that it's mitigating the effectiveness of guns and bombs as tools, right? Again, you can't point the gun at the math problem. You can't coerce people in cyberspace. That just reduces the effectiveness of physical power projection technologies as tools for moving people. And I watched this documentary last night, the Dare to Dream documentary, which is about El Salvador. And the main thing they were focusing on for the next generation, like the kids, getting them to come up and change the patterns of the past, right? Where they obviously El Salvador for a long time was the murder capital of the world, had a very serious gang problem. A lot of parents would leave and go to the US to work for money because their economic conditions were very poor in El Salvador. So parents would leave their kids for 5, 10, 15, 20 years and go to work in the US and send money home to take care of their kids, but their kids would grow up parentless. And so this made the kids more susceptible to gangs. And like you had this very vicious cycle. And these community projects they were doing, like at the Hope House and in El Zante, is they were focusing on giving kids tools, right? They were teaching them English. They were teaching them how to use Bitcoin. And that was the strategy for getting people to pull themselves up out of poverty, basically, is like giving them better tools. So it just seems like this is the critical thing, right? If we're going to live in a world where liberty actually flourishes, the ideology is one thing, right? The appreciation and respect for private property, let's say, or libertarian ideals, that matters. But then you need the actual implementation. They need tools that work, that can actually uphold and I don't know, enforce, impose, embody those ideals. Like you need practical implementations of the ideals that you're trying to live by for it, for the society to work on those principles.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And no, I really love that next sentence because it like as a praxeology fanboy, it's incredible. You have not engaged in our great and gathering conversation, nor did you create the wealth of our marketplaces. And I think this embodies the two axioms of praxeology. The
Mm,
first one, the axiom of argumentation, right? Hans Hermann Hoppe, Economic Science and the Austrian Method,
mm,
must read book. With we have to assume that people argue and argue in good faith because
mhm,
they seek truth, right? And a tyrant does not seek truth. A tyrant does not argue; he
mhm,
commands. A
mhm,
tyrant cannot engage in a great and gathering conversation. So they have not because they cannot. And following up with that, nor did you create the wealth of our marketplace.
mm,
Because wealth can only be created in a marketplace, and a marketplace is only where free individuals gather and act voluntarily and trade out of mutual beneficial interest.
mm.
And again, a tyrant cannot be a participant of a marketplace. A tyrant cannot create, and a tyrant cannot create wealth. So this is just a staggering piece that's so tightly summarizes the two great axioms of praxeology.
Mm. Yeah, it's well said. That book is unbelievably good, by the way. Very short, extremely well written. And yeah, the one point that argumentation presupposes the existence of truth, right? Because argument is the means to the end of truth, basically, right? That's why you argue. You're trying to get to the bottom of it, so to speak. And the other thing that I loved in that book was his explanation of the axiom of action, because he's saying that the axiom of action is axiomatic, meaning it's an assumption you can't refute, basically, because to try and argue against the axiom of action is to use the means of argumentation to the end of refuting the axiom of action, which proves the axiom of action, which says humans must purposefully use means to pursue valued ends. So it's like this, language, this irrefutable, incontrovertible language structure. And
Mhm.
it's just so beautiful the way you said that.
Yeah, and that argumentation is a part of cyberspace, right?
Yes,
That is the realm of the home of the mind, right?
yes.
And that's why tyrants have no power here,
Mm,
because they have to play on our rules because we argue and the code is either correct or it's not correct, right? The math formula is either true or not. You can
yes,
either decrypt the message or you cannot. There is simply no
yes,
way around it.
yes, for sure. Yeah, it's a domain, I guess, where truth actually reigns rather than
Mm,
just arbitrary power, and that makes all
yeah.
the difference. Um, okay, which line are we on now? Is it you claim? Is that where we're at?
You do not know our culture, our ethics, or our unwritten code
Ah,
that already provides our society more order than could be obtained by any of your impositions. No, absolutely beautiful that this realm of cyberspace, yes, it is anarchy. There are no rulers who can compel others, but
mm,
that does not mean that it is chaos. It means that there are a plethora of codes and rules and ethics and culture that is embodied by the people who choose to embody it,
yes,
where that emerges a much more complex and much more beautiful structure, right? Because the cyberspace is so dispersed, it's in the mind of every individual, and when we have full freedom of the individual who is the one to create the space, then it can flourish in ways that nobody else would have thought
mm,
of because you are not the one who came up with it and
mm.
who put out these ideas.
Yeah, I'm reminded here too. I think Bitcoin is Venice is probably the best Bitcoin rabbit hole book. I don't know if you've gotten into
Hmm.
that one yet, but they talk about culture as a form of capital, really.
Mm.
And so this whole thing, like you do not know our culture our ethics, our unwritten codes. In this free market for ideas, there are brand new forms of culture emerging because there are new forms of capital emerging effectively, right? So it's very interesting to look at it that way. Next passage, he writes, "You claim there are problems among us that you need to solve. You use this claim as an excuse to invade our precincts. Many of these problems don't exist. Where there are real conflicts, where there are wrongs, we will identify them and address them by our means. We are forming our own social contract. This governance will arise according to the conditions of our world, not yours. Our world is different." Yeah. So what is the social contract in statism is something like the consent of the governed, right? What is the social contract in cyberspace? It's just rules without rulers, something like that?
Yeah, I would say it's protocols, right? Like HTTP, that's a protocol of two people to talk to each other. And there's like a version handshake basically, where one computer asks the other, yo, this is the protocol I'm speaking. Is it also the protocol you're speaking? And then the other computer replies with, yep, we're talking the same language, we're talking the same protocol. We have a social contract over what do the words mean that we are about to speak to each other. Bitcoin is another one. Right? We have one full node having its own set of rules and receiving a transaction from externally and now validating if this transaction is correct or not, if it is true or not. And if other people come to the same conclusion of, yes, this transaction is valid, then indeed we have a social contract where two people agree on how to engage with each other. And it's not something arbitrary and easily changed. It's actually very clearly defined in bits and bytes. Then also the outcome therefore clearly is, right? If you run a Bitcoin full node software, you implicitly agree with like all of the rules that are embodied in this code because you're running the code on your own machine.
Yes, well said. And the consent of the governed in statist meat space is completely undermined too, right? Once you have the central bank installed, it doesn't really matter the voting, or it doesn't matter as much, that's for sure. I don't want to say it doesn't matter at all, but the mechanism through which you express your preferences, the vote, it just doesn't hold a candle to the money, right? And so once you monopolize the money, the vote is really mitigated as a means of steering the political hierarchy. So I think that social contract just doesn't work with a central bank, basically. And in cyberspace, well, there are no central banks. There's Bitcoin.
Yeah. And like, the first sentence here is so cool. Like, you claim that there are problems among us that you need to solve. It's like saying, hey, the central bank, guys, like, you clearly don't have enough money. Like, we definitely have to print a bunch of Bitcoin now. And I'm here to do that, right? Like, I can totally solve this problem for you, man. I pushed a button. We have 21 billion Bitcoin and more, right? Great. Yeah, but those problems don't exist, right? The problem that you claim exists and that you're here to heroically solve is not a problem. In fact, it is a feature, not a bug, right? So external forces try to make us believe that there are certain problems that need to be addressed, when in reality, they are exactly what the individuals using the system want and how the system should behave. Right? So where there are wrongs, however, right, when someone tries to spend a coin that does not belong to him, meaning he does not have the private key and therefore cannot produce a valid signature, then that means that every Bitcoin full node is simply going to reject this, saying, no, you're not authorized to spend this coin. So we can, with real conflicts, right, which is direct theft of coins that do not belong to you, or indirect theft via inflation of coins that others have chosen to use. These are the actual types of wrongs that we, in fact, have written a software to automatically identify and automatically address them and remove them from being a concern. And we have automated the judge, jury, and executioner position to be a couple lines of code that can be copied ad infinitum for 8 billion people living now and billions of people living in the future. Right?
Yeah, man, it's this idea of a social contract that is written actually in accordance with the plans and preferences of the participants. It's an ideal, basically, right? It's something we've always tried to create in meat space with constitutional republics and things like that, but we've never been able to really do it. But now, through the anarchic reality of cyberspace, we actually have it, right? And to the extent you don't have it, well, guess what? You can just build it, right? There's the terrain is limitless, right? If you don't like the module you're in, you can just go and build a different one or join a different one. And so the whole thing is antithetical to the statist social contract where you're just forced to accept whatever is, right? Whatever the monopolist has created, that's what you have to subscribe to. I think this next passage is like the peak of his poetic writing here. Cyberspace consists of transactions, relationships, and thought itself, arrayed like a standing wave in the web of our communications. Ours is a world that is both everywhere and nowhere, but it is not where bodies live. I just think that's a poetically beautiful line. And again, written in 1996, but he's describing, I mean, obviously he's describing the internet, but this is core to Bitcoin's value proposition, the everywhere and nowhere thing, right? That it's everywhere accessible, but nowhere seizable or confiscatable, something like that.
Yeah, and the fact that he says cyberspace consists of transactions, right? This was well after we had the first online payment systems like Xiaomi and eCash, but where like transactions in cyberspace were still very, very far from reality. Again, eBay did not exist, Amazon did not exist, and he's talking about cyberspace consisting of transactions, right? Which is just incredible. And then of course Bitcoin, like being an like not just a transaction system, but a thing to transact with in cyberspace natively, right? That is not tied to some external thing like a claim on gold or something, but it is the thing that can be transacted, where we have exclusive ownership over it, where some people can move it and other people cannot. And once you've given away, you cannot take it back, right? A good of cyberspace that can be transacted and that will then emerge as you know a just an incredibly useful tool in this realm. It's amazing.
Yeah, very prescient for sure. And he goes on to write here, we are creating a world that all may enter without privilege or prejudice accorded by race, economic power, military force, or station of birth. We are creating a world where anyone, anywhere may express his or her beliefs, no matter how singular, without fear of being coerced into silence or conformity. I really like, I spoke earlier this week with Alex Svetsky, and we were talking about equality. And it's somewhat obvious, I think, to most people that equality of outcome doesn't make any sense at all, right? If you had equality of outcome, there would be no point in working or trying to excel or do anything good. Because if you're going to have the same outcome as everyone else, then there's no incentive to perform, right? If every sports game ended in a tie, none of the players would play hard because it's a quality of outcome. But we got deeper into equality of opportunity as also kind of being a farce because no one has a perfect equality of opportunity, right? No one's born in the same place, same time, same genetics, same parents, same economic situation. Everyone has a different opportunity set in front of them at any given time. And so the real equality that matters, which he's hitting on here, is just having equality in the eyes of the law, right? That we're all playing a game that playing by the same rules, essentially, playing on a level playing field, so to speak. And that's what I think, I mean, that's what we're talking about with Bitcoin and cyberspace, right? It's just this territory that the rule, it's like physics in a way, that the rules apply to all of us equally. No one can bend or break the rules, so you just go and play by the rules. And that just seems to be really important for creating games that are iterable over time, that they don't degenerate, because if the rules can be changed, if someone can get in the position of rule making, well, then they can win the game over and over and over, and eventually that game is going to degenerate, right? And I would say that's what a central bank and a state is sort of doing, right? They have arrogated themselves as the rule-making authority. They bend and twist or even form the rules in their own favor. So you get like a two-tier economic system or rule system that favors insiders and disfavors outsiders, and that breaks, right? It continually degenerates into social revolution after social revolution. And so we needed an actual level playing field, and it seems like Bitcoin and cyberspace are that.
Yeah, and why is it that we have created a world where there is no privilege or prejudice for race, economic power, military force, or station of birth? And it's because of anonymity. Right? If we have a system where you cannot know what the race of someone else is, or his economic power, or his military force, or his station of birth, where these informations are simply never revealed by that person, then there is no way to prescribe some prejudice to that or some privilege. There is no reputation like that anymore, because we have created a realm of perfect anonymity where news can be published, right? And that means like from anyone, anywhere, and you can express your beliefs because of anonymity, regardless of how minor they are, and without fear of being coerced into silence, because there is no way to find out who was the person who spoke these words, right? And the ideas then are judged not by the messenger but by the message itself, and that again, when distributed not just to a select few people but to everyone, where everyone all of a sudden has the power to speak his mind as he sees fit, that increases the freedom of cyberspace and the magnitude thereof, because all of a sudden there are more people who actually provide arguments and free actions. And that initiates all of what we've been talking about.
I love that point you made, judging the message on its own merits rather than judging the message by the messenger, right? You can just let the idea sort of stand on its own 2 feet without it being painted by any political whatever, by the guy or girl that said it. That's a very unique value proposition of cyberspace that we just didn't have that before, right? I mean, I guess you could write anonymously in a way, but to have an entire digital avatar or presence online that's anonymous, even multiple, right? You can have multiple identities online for different purposes. Like this really opens up the possibility of people speaking freely in a way that was never before possible.
One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world. My thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is much more clear. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from 1,473 human trials conducted over a period of 32 years. So if you're looking to start enhancing your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. Now I'd like to tell you about our sponsor, CrowdHealth. CrowdHealth is a crowdfunding platform for paying medical expenses in lieu of an insurance policy. CrowdHealth recently announced that it is integrating Lightning payments with Breeze's Lightning SDK.
In the United States, we spend more than twice the average amount of money on healthcare than other developed nations. Medical costs are one of the leading causes of bankruptcy in the United States, and it is not a secret that the medical system in the US has many issues. The CrowdHealth model is based on offering an alternative to the conventional insurance policy at a cheaper price point. For a monthly membership fee of $50, CrowdHealth will negotiate medical bills to get the cheapest price possible, help locate healthcare providers, offer access to their member crowdfunding service, and more. Prior to the Breeze integration, CrowdHealth had been functioning over traditional fiat payment rails, which introduced unnecessary transaction fees and delays in settlement. By integrating Lightning payments into the CrowdHealth business model, payments between members can now be made with near zero fees and with final settlement occurring in mere seconds. So go to joincrowdhealth.com/breedlove today to sign up.
He goes on here to write, and this is where we get into the world of Bitcoin a little more concretely. Your legal concepts of property, expression, identity, movement, and context do not apply to us. They are all based on matter, and there is no matter here. Our identities. What's that?
Yeah, just wonderful, right? There is no matter here.
Wow. Yes, so good. Our identities have no bodies, so unlike you, we cannot obtain order by physical coercion. We believe that from ethics, enlightened self-interest, and the commonweal, our governance will emerge. Our identities may be distributed across many of your jurisdictions. The only law that all our constituent cultures would generally recognize is the golden rule. We hope we will be able to build our particular solutions on that basis, but we cannot accept the solutions you are attempting to impose. So that one line about we believe that from ethics, enlightened self-interest, and the common weal, our governance will emerge. I really think he's dictating Bitcoin in a way, right? It's like, we talked about this before, but like, okay, ethics, the whole idea of what you should do, right? Not the descriptive perspective on reality, but the prescriptive orientation to reality. What should we do about it, right? This is how things are. What should we do about it? And I think Bitcoin's so interesting that it's this might be a stretch, but I've said it's sort of like a system of ethics energized by economic incentives. Mm-hmm. It's incentivizing us to act a certain way in the world, right? That we should actually, the natural law dictum, do not steal. It's sort of incentivizing you not to steal and incentivizing you to be honest. And so in that way, it's like, it's not just ethical code written down saying, here's what we should do. And like, let's just trust and hope everyone does that. It's actually paying you mm-hmm. to be honest and to not, to propagate honest transactions and it makes stealing difficult basically. So it makes stealing less profitable. So it's kind of like a penalty to stealing or an inhibition rather than a penalty, I guess. And so that steers, at least in theory, who knows what's going to happen here. Maybe we've just all drank too much Bitcoin Kool-Aid, but in theory, it steers human action in an ethical direction through the presence of economic incentives, something like that. Mm-hmm. And that's what governance is, right? It's like governing what people do. And so Bitcoin really does seem to be kind of like have like this ethical or governance dimension to it that he's predicting here.
Yeah. And in the previous sentence, right, we cannot obtain order by physical coercion. Again, we talked about this in the past, but this simply means that because in this world, in this realm of cyberspace, coercion and violence is no longer an option. Mm-hmm. And this means we have to deal with the problems elsewise. And if we have the Hoppian view that ethics is about non-coercion, then this means that like most or any action in cyberspace will be ethical because coercion and violence is not possible. Mm. And then enlightened self-interest is the game theory and economic incentives that you have mentioned. And commonweal is the realization that theft is prosperous for everyone, right? And out of all of these three facets, governance will emerge, which we absolutely see in Bitcoin, right? It's a beautiful level of governance that clearly says what is correct and what is not correct. and that fully enforces those claims of quality. And in that next sentence, then our identities may be distributed across many of your jurisdictions. Again, 1996, but it predicts peer-to-peer technologies, which at that point didn't much exist, right? In the sense of BitTorrent, for example, or Bitcoin. This is when we can distribute risks of acting and by just replicating the code and running it on numerous computers by numerous people, so that if one of those people or computers gets shut down, the system as a whole does not die because it is distributed across jurisdictions. And then that means that an attacker needs to coordinate across time and space and jurisdictions for a massive attack, which again, because information longs to be free and code can be copied extremely cheaply, the thought of eradicating the Bitcoin source code ever is preposterous, because how could you ever attempt it?
Yeah, it's such a great point. It's amazing how much he could see around the corner, I guess. Okay, in the next passage he's writing, in the United States, you have today created a law, the Telecommunications Reform Act, which repudiates your own constitution and insults the dreams of Jefferson, Washington, Mill, Madison, de Tocqueville, and Brandeis. These dreams must now be born anew in us. I assume he's saying that the Telecommunications Reform Act contradicts the First Amendment and the freedom of speech, but I'm not exactly sure. Do you know much about this Telecommunications Reform Act and why it was specifically bad for liberty?
Yeah, so this was an act signed in by Bill Clinton, by the way, not Bush, as I said earlier. And it was framed as being a great deregulation move over the broadcasting and the telecommunications marketing. But in fact, it added the internet as being part of that coverage, and specifically the Communication Decency Act, where there was a board of bureaucrats who can dictate which words and which statements are decent and shall be allowed to be published. And if certain sentiments or words are not agreed or sanctioned by this group of bureaucrats, then it is illegal to publish these, which of course is contradictory to reality. It is simply impossible to prevent people in cyberspace from speaking. Again, because they can do so anonymously and because they can do so in a self-sovereign manner on their own computers and with their own actions. So the attempt of silencing a minority simply because they are not liked by a group of bureaucrats is not just against ethics of man, but it's against the reality of how cyberspace works. And that is what he's pointing out, that this law, like, even if well intentioned, is very much against reality and against how decent human beings ought to behave.
Yeah, it's great that pre-cyberspace, a piece of legislation like that could be really destructive, but post-cyberspace, it's like it's moot in a way, right? It's like
there's no power here.
Yeah, we've joked before in Bitcoin, it's like passing a bill to ban Bitcoin is like passing a bill to ban gravity. Like, sure, you can pass it, but it's not going to change anything. And again, maybe that's a bit of a stretch. I don't know, but the spirit of the comment is that it's basically unenforceable, right? There's a new technological paradigm where the enforceability of this law is just near zero, something like that. And thank God for that, right? Thank God that we can talk freely and, tell the emperor he has no clothes, so to speak.
Yeah.
All right, next passage. You want to read the next one? I think I read the last one.
Yeah, like you are terrified of your own children, since they are natives in the world where you will always be immigrants. And because you fear them, you entrust your bureaucracies with the parental responsibilities you are too cowardly to confront yourselves. That's again like so powerful, and it just echoes so much from what we see today. I mean, look at how central bankers are talking about Bitcoin, and people who work on Bitcoin. They are terrified of the power that is within these technologies, and they don't understand that this great power is to their own best benefit, and to the immense benefit for the future. And so they are literally afraid of their children, because you can be for sure, damn sure, that every bureaucrat or central banker who is yelling against Bitcoin, that his children are very much Bitcoiners, because they get it, since they are born natively to this world of cyberspace. Again, this was written in 1996. There's now 20 years later, a bunch of people have been born to cyberspace after this was already a reality. And I mean, who knows about the next generation of people being born now who are natively born not just to cyberspace of information, but to the cyberspace of money as well with Bitcoin. And the fact that because of that fear, you allocate additional powers to bureaucracies for this parental responsibility. Like, if such an act is taken out of fear, it can never be benevolent. It can never lead to order and wisdom, right? Love has to be the foundation, and not this type of fear. And I think in Bitcoin, the people collaborating and working on this do it out of love, versus the people who fight against it do it out of fear. And that is ultimately why we are winning.
Well said. I think fiat is entirely fear-based. It's obviously imposed by fear, right? Threats. But then those doing the imposing are acting out of fear too, right? It's like, oh, I need more whatever, need more purchasing power or wealth. I need to steal it from others, rather than acting in love, right? Which is acknowledging your fellow man as a rational being, right? And treating them as such. It's you're treating them like an animal instead. You're trying to coerce them. And this idea of the children being born into the digital world natively, I think that gives so much credence to that saying that there's nothing more unstoppable than an idea whose time has come. It's like it's the same thing we were saying earlier, right? Once the solution, you solve the problem once, and then you distribute the solution in cyberspace, it's solved for everyone, everywhere, forever. And that's really what Bitcoin is, right? Like, we've had broken money forever. We've had, approximations of good money and a gold standard here and there, but we've never had truly good money, sustainably good, unbreakable money. And what do we have now, right? We have everyone growing up at the digital age. I can't imagine a world where kids have this much access to information that would ever support a central bank. Like, oh yeah, I'm going to hold my savings in this, funny money, paper money that they can just print ad infinitum. Like, the value proposition of Bitcoin might be complicated, but it's not that complicated, right? It's just owning something that other people can't steal or produce.
Truth
Kids are going to
rarely is
figure that out.
competent, right?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Truth rarely is complicated. Right?
Exactly.
Should be common sense. It makes sense. It's just not common these days.
And it was common in eras past, right? I would say we've got kind of a fiat hangover in modernity, but kids are going to figure it out, and I think kids are already figuring it out. It's so give it 25 years, and like it's just going to be common sense once again.
Yeah, and to continue, in our world, all the sentiments and expressions of humanity, from the debasing to the angelic, are parts of a seamless whole, the global conversation of bits. We cannot separate the air that chokes from the air upon which wings beat. And that's just something beautifully said in the realm that of how freedom enables the individual to be both demonic and angelic. And we have the freedom to steal from others. And we also have the freedom to cooperate from others. This is something that is in our power to do. And that, as a seamless whole, is humanity, right? The line of good and evil runs through the heart of every individual. And so it is in cyberspace, where we can use this utmost power of talking to a bunch of people to express bad things and good things. Like, there are bad things happening in cyberspace, absolutely, right? Propaganda being for example one of them, but that is part of the global conversation, right? This is simply how humans are, and we can express this and proliferate it in bits both ways, right? And we cannot separate the air that chokes from the air upon which wings beat. If we would have the ability, which we don't, but even if we would have the ability to censor the internet and cyberspace so that all of the bad actions would not be there, then equally there would not be any good actions left. Because if you are compelled to act in a good way, then that is no longer the good way, because you were compelled to do so. You are under threat of coercion and violence, and therefore, by definition, the act is not mutually beneficial.
Right.
Because if you would have chosen it voluntarily, well, that's a whole separate thing. But being forced to be gratuitous, to be kind, to be loving to others, it's an oxymoron.
Yes. Yeah, it's a confession. If the coercion is necessary, then you're confessing that it's not beneficial to one party, right? Whoever the coerced party is, they're not willing to do it on their own accord, then they're not benefiting from it, or at least they're not thinking they're going to benefit from it. So it's an oxymoron. Like you said, you cannot coerce goodwill or anything good for that matter. Okay, continuing here, he writes, in China, Germany, France, Russia, Singapore, Italy, and the United States, you are trying to ward off the virus of liberty by erecting guard posts at the frontiers of cyberspace. These may keep out the contagion for a small time, but they will not work in a world that will soon be blanketed in bit-bearing media. Your increasingly obsolete information industries would perpetuate themselves by proposing laws in America and elsewhere that claim to own speech itself throughout the world. These laws would declare ideas to be another industrial product, no more noble than pig iron. In our world, whatever the human mind may create can be reproduced and distributed infinitely at no cost. The global conveyance of thought no longer requires your factories to accomplish. So again, back to that idea we talked about at the top of the show, we've just moved, and I think this goes a long ways to explaining all of the tumult we're seeing in the modern age, is that we've moved from a world with a few information distribution channels or media channels, if you want to call them that, to one in which any individual human with access to the internet can be a media channel or an information distribution channel in and unto themselves. Sovereign Individual called this the move from broadcasting, from broadcasting to narrowcasting? Is that what it was? Where instead you had this kind of one-to-many media model, we now have a many-to-many media model. And that's much harder to control. Like, how do you control that? It's damn near impossible, as we're seeing with all the veil of bullshit being lifted in the world on different things, right? Pharmaceuticals, central banking, WikiLeaks, the list goes on and on and on of how truth is being revealed more quickly in the digital age.
Yeah. And, like back in the early days of cinema and movies, there were like boards of decency to watch every movie and give it a parental rate on like how old should be the people who watch these movies. And you can attempt to do that in a broadcast media, right? And now with the internet and the Telecommunications Act, they were trying to do the same thing for this narrow casting, where the many-to-many interactions. And Barlow is simply pointing out, like, it barely worked back then, and it for sure is not going to work now. So what you're doing is pointless. It is against nature, and you cannot fight nature. And like that, there's these. They try to erect these guard posts at the frontiers of cyberspace. And they may keep out the contention for a small time, but they will not work in a world that will soon be blanketed in bits and bit-bearing media. So this just means that, and so similar to Bitcoin, right? They are trying so hard at the frontiers of cyberspace, at the place where you can exchange, for example, your fiat to Bitcoin. They try so hard with so many guard posts and regulations and treating anyone like a criminal and demanding full surveillance over how much Bitcoin are you buying and where are you keeping them and why are you doing that, right? In order to delay the inevitable, but they can at most delay it, and most likely the fearful and hysterical clinging on to the powers that are left will squeeze those in the fiat realm so much that they will even the faster look for alternatives that are more free and more prosperous. So they might delay it for a small time, but I think that at some point the doors will break, and the onslaught of freedom-loving individuals who claim their own rights back in cyberspace with strong encryption, with Bitcoin, etc., will simply be overwhelming.
Yeah, wonderfully said. It's really an attempt to fight the tide, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of when the Gutenberg printing press emerged, and the church at first ignored it. Then eventually they tried to censor the printing press. And then that led to more books being printed about how to construct the printing press. Like you try to, it's the anti-fragile thing. You try to cut off one head and three more pop up, and it's basically unstoppable. It also reminds me of that meme of the guy that's like mopping at the beach. He's like trying to mop up all the water at the beach. It's like, it's so pointless. This thing it's everywhere and nowhere, right? It's liquid. So how are you you can't erect these barriers to stop it. I don't know. It's very, very interesting that way.
Yeah.
You want to read this last piece? Curious out? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, they claim to own speech itself throughout the world. Right? So, like, two preposterous things. First, you claim to own speech, not the speech of yourself, but the speech of others. And not just those within your vicinity, but those on the other side of the planet. Like, how ludicrous that is. It's baffling. And the exact same argument now, 20 years later, can be made with Bitcoin. Right? Bitcoin is just speech. The Bitcoin code base, the Bitcoin transactions, the Bitcoin mining, it's all simply speech. It's just reproducing information. And trying to claim that a select few individuals have the ownership over the speech of others on the other side of the planet is even more preposterous now than it was 27 years ago.
Yes. Yeah. Beautifully written. I will read, I guess, the last passage here to carry us out. These increasingly hostile and colonial measures place us in the same position as those previous lovers of freedom and self-determination who had to reject the authorities of distant, uninformed powers. We must declare our virtual selves immune to your sovereignty, even as we continue to consent to your rule over our bodies. We will spread ourselves across the planet so that no one can arrest our thoughts. We will create a civilization of the mind in cyberspace. May it be more humane and fair than the world your governments have made before. The thing that really jumped out to me there is in the beginning where he's saying those previous lovers of freedom and self-determination who had to reject the authorities of distant, uninformed powers. This whole idea of restoring skin in the game, just individuals being responsible for the consequences of their actions, right? It's such a simple idea. Pre-fiat world, leaders used to lead from the front, right? Like Napoleon would lead his troops into battle from the front, Alexander the Great, etc. But now we have people leading battles from the back, right? Generals in Washington, D.C. that are, authorizing drone strikes in the Middle East, for instance, right? Hiding behind layers of bureaucracy and ocean and etc. They're not, those individuals that are executing the actions are not exposed to the consequences of their actions, right? If they misstep or mess up, they're not the ones dying in battle. There's other people dying for them. I think that's a real problem, right? When you start to disconnect actors from the consequences of their actions, you get really perverted consequences. And it seems like in cyberspace, and like we talk about with Bitcoin being basically radical responsibility, not your keys, not your coin, as one aspect of that. It's reconverging actors with their actions and the consequences of their actions. And I think that's very important for creating a free and functional world.
Yeah, yeah, and again, that is not a new thing. It is Moses leading the slaves out of Egypt. It is Washington Jefferson declaring independence from a old and remote British king. It is the early cypherpunks declaring the independence of cyberspace, and it is Satoshi declaring the independence of money. All of these are the trend in the same direction towards the same goal, and we must declare our virtual selves immune to your sovereignty. It is a moral and ethical obligation to defend yourself, because that defends not just you individually, that defends humanity as an ideal and as an aspect. And when humanity is being trampled upon and spit in the face, then we have a duty to declare ourselves immune and to ensure that sovereignty and tyrants do no longer have power over us. When strong encryption is available to protect your speech, when Bitcoin is available to protect your money, and you are not using this, it is a insult to humanity and what we could achieve if we would enforce the obsolescence of theft.
Beautifully said. I'm reminded too of the Gandhi quote, when I'll paraphrase, when the state has become lawless or corrupt, then civil disobedience becomes a sacred duty, right? We are bound to the preservation of our species. Like, this is no joke. So yeah, this is a wonderful piece of writing. Very short, very poetic, but very on point.
Mm. And this final sentence in the paragraph, we will spread ourselves across the planet so that no one can arrest our thoughts. And again, this is peer-to-peer technology. This is BitTorrent, so that nobody can stop thoughts from being spread. And this is Bitcoin, where nobody can stop a money issuance to be stopped. And it's also Bitcoin multi-signature, where the spending of a coin cannot be stopped. And that is absolutely wild. Right? So we are creating a civilization of mind in cyberspace. There has not been a civilization before. If you think about it, with the amount of theft that was not just possible, but that was encouraged. However, in cyberspace, where theft has become impossible, that means that civilization can rise to an extent that we have never seen before. And the final sentence is hopeful and cautious, that hopefully it may be more humane and fair than the world your governments have made before. And I think with the economic and ethical and philosophical rigor of the arguments provided in this piece, I think that hope of a more humane and fair future is a bright one.
Agreed. And that is a great place to put a button on it. Max, thank you for recommending this piece. I think this fits perfectly into the series. And thank you again for doing this.
Yeah, thanks, Rob, for the continued conversations. I really enjoyed a lot. I love these long-form dialogues, and I hope the audience does too. This is a quite fascinating piece. And, in preparation to this, I didn't find a like in-depth analysis of what this all means. So I'm quite happy that we got this on record, and hopefully it's something, useful and valuable for others.
Indeed. Until next time, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.